I am now going to hand over the webinar to our speakers. So our first speaker, Michael Falkowski, is a program scientist in NASA's Terrestrial Ecology program, where he supports ABoVE, the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment. And our second speaker, Thorsten Markus, is the head of the Cryospheric Science Lab at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and the project scientist for the ICESat-2 mission. So welcome both of you. Michael, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Liz. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen here and hopefully it all works. We just tested it. So I'm going to go first today, and I'm just going to give a real brief overview of the Terrestrial Ecology program at NASA, and I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, which is a 10-year field campaign that we've been running out of the Terrestrial Ecology program. And then I'll talk a little bit about the current solicitation that we have for ABoVE. So, and then I'll turn it over to Thorsten and Caitlin to talk about the Cryospheric Sciences program. So I'm going to go to full screen here. Do you see my slides, Liz?
Yep, we see your slides. Looks great. And now we see them in full screen. Thanks so much.
All right. Excellent. So as I said, my name is Mike Falkowski, and I'm going to talk real briefly about the TE program at NASA headquarters. So the Terrestrial Ecology program has been around for a very long time, and we're really focused on improving our understanding of the structure and function of terrestrial ecosystems on the Earth's surface, and specifically their interactions with things like the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the role that terrestrial ecosystems play in cycling major biogeochemical elements and water through the Earth system. In terms of how we do this, we primarily solicit research that leverages NASA airborne and satellite observations, as well as Earth system models and ecosystem models to answer some critical questions in this area. We're really interested in utilizing satellite data in all our solicitations and developing new capabilities for enhancing and leveraging space-based observations of things like global carbon stocks, primary productivity, vegetation composition, phenology, succession, biodiversity, so on and so forth. Typically, we have solicitations coming out every year or every couple of years, and they always come out through the NASA Research Opportunities in Earth and Space Sciences Omnibus research announcement, which is released annually on February 14th. I'd like to point out that everybody loves to get roses on Valentine's Day, so this is why NASA does this. Solicitation topics vary, but they generally align with these keywords that you'll see at the top of this bottom box here. So we're interested in terrestrial ecosystems, carbon and nutrient cycles, ecosystem vulnerability and resilience, vegetation composition, structure and function, among others. One sort of unique characteristic of the Terrestrial Ecology program is we have a long history of doing what we call large multi-year field campaigns, where we'll dedicate a large portion, if not all, of our allocated research funding for an extended period of time to really study and characterize some component of some biome or other component of an Earth ecosystem really intensely. And so we have a history of doing that. One of the earlier ones was called Boreas, which was a field campaign focused on boreal forests in Canada. That was followed by one called LBA, which was a field campaign where we intensively studied the rainforests in Brazil, the Brazilian Amazon. And currently we're about, I guess, 2/3 of the way through the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, which is really focused on characterizing climate change and associated impacts on socio-ecological systems in Alaska and Western Canada. So here's a word cloud that I took from abstracts. I created this from abstracts that were funded through the TE program or projects related to the TE program. I think this is from 2020. So this gives you an idea of what our PIs are generally, PIs that we fund through our program are generally studying. So again, ecosystem comes up big. The larger the word, the more frequently it appeared in abstracts that I did this for. So ecosystem, carbon, model, climate, all very important to our program. And you can see that this word cloud, 2020, we're probably starting to get a significant amount of publications coming out from above. And so we're starting to see things like permafrost, Arctic is in here, What else do we have? So other things related to Arctic and boreal systems start to pop up in terms of what our PIs are publishing on right now. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with ABoVE. I'm sure you've heard about it, but I'll give you a brief overview of ABoVE, and then I'll transition into talking about the solicitation that we currently have on the books right now, with proposals due here in several weeks. So as I mentioned before, ABoVE stands for the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, and it's a 10-year field campaign focused on understanding climate change and associated impacts on socio-ecological systems in Alaska and Western Canada. And when I say field campaign, what that means is that we go in and we fund researchers to go intensively study different components of this region and ecosystems in this region using a whole variety of techniques, everything from in situ data collection in the field to airborne observations, all the way up to satellite observations and modeling. And really our overarching questions are to understand how vulnerable and resilient ecosystems and society are to environmental change in the Arctic and boreal region of Western North America. And there's several other science questions under this, which you can find on the ABoVE webpage. But in the current solicitation, we're really focused on leveraging how we can use insights gained from previous ABoVE efforts to extrapolate to continental and circumpolar boreal and Arctic zones. So this is a schematic showing you the general concept of how ABoVE is structured in terms of the field campaign. We're using the vulnerability and resilience framework to drive a lot of how we design this study and how we conduct the research. And we're interested in looking at the causes of change, and what are the causes of the change that we're seeing in terms of climate change and ecosystem change. We're interested in characterizing the changes to ecosystem structure and function, and by looking at how they're responding to all sorts of different external drivers. We're interested in how these ecosystems changes impact ecosystem services, things like food, for example, food resources for indigenous and local populations, for example, and then also translating that into impacts on social ecological systems. And as I mentioned before, that we do this how NASA does things really well. We scale from observations all the way down from the leaf level, the ground level, all the way up to satellite and model levels to get a real end-to-end picture of how things are changing across multiple spatial and temporal scales. That's a repeat slide for some reason. Don't know why that's there. ABoVE was designed initially, and we're adhering to this schedule of a three-phase sort of approach, where each phase is broken out into 3 different years. There was also a pre-ABoVE phase where we solicited research before phase 1 of ABoVE started to collect a lot of the baseline measurements in terms of field data and airborne data to support research that we funded in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 ABoVE. And so this timeline just shows you a general idea of how we're transitioning from the types of research we're supporting in the different phases of ABoVE. Phase 1 really focused on the ecosystem dynamics objectives, which you can learn about a little bit more on our ABoVE webpage. Here's where we took a lot of the intensive field measurements and started collecting field data as well. Field measurements as well as airborne data. Phase 2 generally transitioned away from focusing on ecosystem dynamics and taking what we learned about ecosystem dynamics and moving to focusing on ecosystem services. So we did also support some field data collection, definitely supported airborne data collection, but this is where we started to get into some more of the modeling approaches, looking at ecosystem services. And then phase 3, which we're soliciting for right now, the solicitation is currently out in roses. We're focused on taking all the data and everything that we learned from the first 2 phases to start doing some larger scale analysis and synthesis from the data and research that's been done to date. So to date, there's been 4 ABoVE solicitations, 1 pre-ABoVE. Phase 1 and phase 2 have both been solicited, and phase 3 is now out. And we've funded over 50 projects, and we're starting to see all sorts of publications come out of that. But in addition to publications, we're seeing a lot of airborne and field data sets also being published and made publicly available. As I mentioned, phase 3, the final phase of ABoVE, is currently open for submissions. I have a link to the solicitation here, which is hyperlinked. I think Liz will be posting these slides later, so you can click to that. The due date is November 17th. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but this is just right out of the solicitation, which you can go read for yourself. I'll give you a couple highlights. The overall focus in phase 3 is on synthesis activities that combine all sorts of data sets to look at the vulnerability and resilience of Arctic and boreal ecosystems across the ABoVE domain and across the circumpolar region. So we're trying to extrapolate a little bit beyond the ABoVE domain to start to learn more about the circumpolar region using either models or remote sensing data sets. Integration of all the research results and remote sensing data into a coherent modeling framework, and then filling critical research gaps on how environmental change impacts dynamics of Arctic and boreal ecosystems within the ABoVE domain. And one key thing here to point out is the geographic focus of the proposed research must be within the ABoVE domain, although we are open to, as I mentioned in point A here, to funding studies that are taking what we've learned in the ABoVE domain and extrapolating to the circumpolar region. So this is a little bit of a repeat and some more detail. I'm not going to go over this, but again, we're really in this phase. We're really starting to put the rubber to the road in terms of understanding the impacts to ecosystem services and communities as well. And we're also point number 3 talks about some of the airborne and field campaigns and how we hope to support what we learned from ABoVE, use that to support future satellite missions, which I believe Thorsten might talk about, at least NICESat, a little bit in his presentation, which is the new NASA Earth System Observatory, one of the missions in that you'll hear more about in the future, as well as surface biology and geology mission, which is a hyperspectral mission. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. This is my last slide, I believe. But again, we want to use remote sensing within the ABoVE domain to fill critical gaps. And then we specifically call out 4 different critical gaps. And these are all derived from a paper that our ABoVE science team is putting out, looking at what are some of the critical gaps that we've learned and would like to fill given past ABoVE research. So looking at methane and carbon dioxide emissions related to fire, flooding, shrub encroachment, and permafrost dynamics, and look at carbon climate feedbacks from those data. Really interested in cold season properties, feedbacks between snow properties, wildfire, and carbon fluxes, as well as vegetation dynamics and how those things may impact key wildlife species. Impacts of ecological disturbance and environmental change on the distribution, function, and structure of vegetation within the ABoVE domain. And then finally, integration of field data, remote sensing data, and modeling to understand the interaction between hydrology and permafrost thaw and impacts on northern ecosystem dynamics. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Thorsten and Caitlin, and then perhaps if you have questions for me, we can do that once their presentation is done. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Thorsten, can you see the screen okay?
I can see my screen. Okay. Well, actually, I can see your screen okay.
Perfectly. Perfect.
Thank you for hosting. Just a quick correction. I'm not at NASA Goddard anymore. I'm at headquarters for the last 2 years, and I realized I need to update my profile on the IAPIC website.
Sorry about that.
This is funny. It's still there, and I completely forgot about it. So, yeah, let me talk a little bit about our Cryospheric Sciences program and a few other things that are going on at HQ related to cryosphere, related to the polar regions. And I also want to introduce Caitlin. Maybe I don't know whether it's still necessary. Caitlin joined me at HQ in January, and together we're managing the Cryospheric Sciences program. So if you talk to Caitlin, you talk to me. If you talk to me, to talk to Caitlin. So if you go to the next slide, this is just some general updates. ICESat-2 launched 3 years ago and it's doing really, really, really great. As a matter of fact, I think tomorrow will be the 3rd anniversary of switching on the lasers, if I'm not mistaken. But Caitlin, you can correct me. think it was October 15th. Yeah, it's doing wonderful. There's fantastic science coming out of it. And, you know, as usual with science teams for NASA satellite missions, the science team will be recompeted every 3 years. So we competed the science team, the post-launch science team, in ROSAS 2019, and then you know, next year we will recompete the science team. Operation Icebridge finally ended, and that's you know, it's a big loss, if you will, for, you know, cryospheric sciences, for NASA cryospheric sciences in particular. The data it collected were absolutely fantastic, and I wish we could you know, continue to take at least some of the measurements that are critically needed, as a matter of fact, to establish a longer time series of, you know, some cryospheric processes. But, you know, we just have to suck it up, if you will. Missions don't last forever, and I think with 10 years of Icebridge, we got a phenomenal data set together that, you know, in the years to come will be very useful for the scientific community. Mike alluded to NICESat. So NICESat launch is delayed, and the current launch date is about probably summer of 2023. NICESat is a big deal for cryo. It's very important for, it's a satellite interferometer, and it's, you know, it's important for CRS. It's important, even more important, so maybe for ice sheet, where it will provide absolutely stunning information of ice sheet velocities, and with a precision and with a repeat frequency that we haven't had yet. So that's going to be a phenomenal data set, and we will learn so much from NICESat. The problem why NICESat is delayed is it's COVID-19. NICESat was in integration and testing, and with COVID-19 and JPL closing, etc., there was not much integration to be done because people were not allowed to go on base. So that delayed NICESat. And then also it's a joint mission with the Indian Space Agency and the US radar, and the Indian radar showed some interference, and that, you know, that needed to be figured out, and that cost, you know, some additional delays. So right now, as it stands, it's, you know, roughly the summer of 2023. If you are a PI or a COI and on a NASA funded proposal, and you're annoyed with, you know, us getting the money to you, the grants process is way too slow. And, you know, this has now reached the attention of, you know, the Science Mission Directorate level. You know, I cannot, yeah, it's too slow. I apologize for it. It's you know, COVID-19 played some roles in there as well, because people couldn't work, etc. You know, it has reached higher levels at NASA, and, you know, we are working on it. So again, all I can do is apologize. And if you really, you know, if you run into problems, please don't hesitate. If you're, you know, if I'm a technical officer, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I'm sure you can contact all the other technical officers at NASA as well, you know, so that we can help push things forward if, you know, there's some critical need. And often, you know, there is some critical need, which I completely understand, because you all, you know, you need to, you know, you need your salaries. And so this is completely understood, and students need to be paid, etc. As you may know, we are in a continuing resolution. We do not have our budget for fiscal year 22 yet. Given the change in administration and given what, you know, NASA proposed, we're all hoping that the Decadal Survey missions would be accelerated, that there would be funding for more funding for Earth science, and I'm hoping more funding for cryospheric sciences. But we're all in a waiting loop right now, and we don't have a budget for 2022, which means we are operating on the 2021 budget, and, you know, we have to request specific funds that we need to disperse. Hopefully there's some good news sometime in December, but you know how it goes. Things can be quite slow in Congress. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. This has, of course, become a big topic, and we do have a task force at the HQ level, and so hopefully we will see some changes. People are taking it very seriously. But if you do have some thoughts how we can do better within the Cryospheric Sciences program, please let me know. And I really welcome your thoughts and input, your ideas, etc. So if you go to the next slide. Similar to Mike, just a general overview. That's part of, that's a standard couple of sentences that are taken from my ROSAS calls. So the Cryospheric Sciences program supports investigations of polar ice, including the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, polar glaciers, and sea ice in the Arctic and the Southern Oceans, that are based on satellite and airborne remote sensing. That's, it's kind of an important addition there. We are a space agency in the end. The program seeks to improve our understanding of cryospheric processes, link the cryosphere to the global climate system, and or advance predictive capabilities. Pretty much that's, my mission statement for the Cryospheric Sciences program. And if you go to the next slide, and as part of this, our science portfolio, our funding portfolio consists of, quite a variety of activities. We're funding, in situ measurements. We're funding people going to Greenland, going to Antarctica. Of course, that is all still a little bit of chaos, and we're moving, field experiments are being moved around, and we are working closely with NSF to adjust logistics, to help out wherever we can. And we do have a really good relationship with NSF, with especially Jen Mercer for the Arctic and Paul Cutler for the Antarctic, to make field work happen wherever we can. We support and supported, especially with IceBridge, measurements, airborne campaigns, measurements from aircraft. Obviously, we have our space program, and satellite data are our bread and butter science tool, if you will. And then we also do support modeling efforts that enhance our predictability, and ideally use, as I said earlier or before in the previous slide, use satellite data to set up models to help to set up data assimilation schemes, etc., so that as a whole we are better in understanding polar processes, cryospheric processes, and enhance our predictive capabilities, because in the end prediction is a key of getting the public prepared for the consequences and effects of climate change. And if we go to the next slide. So I had a ROSAS cryosphere call out that is closed right now, and I don't want to get into this. It was a small, very specific call. The reason why I'm showing it is on the next slide. If you go to the next slide, Liz. So NASA is moving towards using dual anonymous peer review, or DAPR, for proposal evaluations. Proposals submitted to this program will be evaluated using a dual anonymous peer review process, in which not only are the proposers unaware of the identity of the members on the review panel, but also the reviewers, the panel, they do not have explicit knowledge of the proposal team during the scientific evaluation of the proposal. That is, the evaluation of scientific merit, cost, and relevance is without knowing who is the proposing team. And the overarching objective of this dual anonymous peer review is to reduce unconscious biases in the evaluation of the merit of a proposal. And this came up in previous panels, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, and people admit to it, to distinguish, separate, if you will, proposer from proposal. And so in order to, in some ways to make it easier for the panel, make it more fair and level the playing field, especially planetary sciences and astrophysics at NASA, started with this dual anonymous peer review. And it has been a great success. And it's moving more and more towards making this dual anonymous peer review a default process for, for proposals where it makes sense. There may be investigations where, airborne programs or where people, supply instruments or so, where it does not really make sense, where it's impossible to do, but where it makes sense, the dual anonymous peer review process may, will likely become the default process, and I think it's a good thing. And so far experiences have been really, really good. And it started, in the 80s or so with, I'm digressing a little bit, with orchestras having, when musicians had auditions, have the musicians play after behind a wall so that the orchestra and the conductors couldn't see the agenda anymore. And, it became immediately more equal. And we saw the same, NASA saw the same thing happen with Hubble Space Telescope, where with science grants, where before dual anonymous peer review, the success rate of female PIs was lower than that of male PIs, and that made people think. And then they implemented the dual anonymous peer review, and things got evened out. So I think so far it has been a great success, and I don't see a downside of it. And so, as I said, it will likely become the default process, and we will see how this goes. And glad to talk more with you about that. If we go to the next slide. So the Cryospheric program, though, is not the only opportunity for cryospheric or polar research at NASA. Other programs or solicitations with frequent cryosphere or polar components are the modeling and prediction program that is led by David Considine, physical oceanography. They are often interested in high latitude oceanography. Interdisciplinary sciences, well, as the name says, it is interdisciplinary, so there are often polar cryo components in those cards, and also measures has several projects funded that are cryo programs. So look out for those. And then also, and I really want to mention that is, there are lots of specific satellite mission science team calls out and for different missions. And it's important, and I will talk about the Decadal missions in a second. It's important that cryospheric scientists, in our case, in my case, apply to those science teams, because it's important that cryosphere is represented in those missions, whether it's a precipitation mission, whether it's a solid Earth mission. Precipitation obviously is very important in the polar regions. Snowfall is very important in the polar regions. So it's important that there's a cryospheric scientist present on the science team defining that mission, that helps define the mission, so that polar processes and cryospheric processes in particular, for me, are represented in these missions. So I just want to, make you aware of those, and there are lots of opportunity out coming. There will be lots of opportunities out in the future with the expected implementation of the Decadal survey. So, and then furthermore, if you go to the next slide, Liz. We have a couple of early career programs. We have the new investigator program that is solicited every 3 years. It came out just last year, so the next one will be in 2023. It's a small program for early career scientists, for people who have got their PhD within the last 5 years. The fun thing about this one is that it's basically a single PI proposal. It's a small proposal, but it's very, very open. So if you're an early career scientist, you have some great idea, and and think, I always wanted to do this, then you can, then this is an opportunity to do exactly that. It's a panel I always enjoy because people are really smart and have really good ideas. So if you're an early career scientist, as I said, within 5 years, think about proposing. As I said, it's the only downside is it's only solicited every 3 years, and the next one's in 2023. If you go to the next slide, an annual call is though is finest, future investigators in NASA Earth and Space Sciences and Technology. That the finest solicitation has replaced the NASA Earth and Space Science Fellowship, and finest, in contrast to the fellowship, is not a fellowship. It's a grant led by a PI, generally a professor. And in these proposal calls, there is a PI, the professor in general, commonly, and then there's an FI, the future investigator, which is a student. And people realize, it's mostly the student who is doing the work, but there's also part of this proposal is also a mentoring plan. So where it will be evaluated how the professor will actually mentor the student. So the professor has also some responsibility in this finest call. And with Cryo, we have been very successful in the last years. We had some excellent proposals, and I'm really trying hard to fund, all the excellent proposals. The grant money is $45,000 a year, and there has been some discussion recently of increasing this fund, because it's realized that $45,000 a year are not sufficient to fully support a student. But it's to some extent also not the expectation, and very often academic institutions chip in the remaining of the funds, but there are some discussions of increasing the amount of money available for finest students. If you go to the next slide. DecaturServer. I talked about DecaturServer a little bit, and we'll talk about this only very briefly, because many of you may have heard it, maybe actually tired of hearing this. So when the Decadal Survey came out in 2017 or 2018, really, they identified 5 targeted observables that are, designated, if you will. And for those five top observables, there studies are underway, mission concepts are being developed and proposed, and we are hopeful that the implementation of those missions, can be accelerated with, as I said, with the change in administration. The next class consists of 7 targeted observables identified as an explorer, and we are hoping to have a draft announcement out by the end of the year, hopefully before HU. And the targeted observables are greenhouse gases, ice elevation, ocean surface winds and currents. If you go to the next slide, Liz, ozone and trace gases, snow depth and snow water equivalent, and terrestrial ecosystems and atmospheric winds. Sorry. So that draft announcement of opportunity is in the works right now. And then finally, we have 2 observables, planetary boundary layer and surface topography and vegetation, that are indicated as or classified as incubation. And the Decadal Survey incubation call to get involved with those 2 missions, I think that call closed today, as a matter of fact. So if you think of getting involved, if you wrote a proposal, then great. If you didn't write a proposal, then you have until midnight. So that call is basically closed. If you go to the next slide. So our head of Earth Science, Karen St. Germain, for her, it's very important that these, 5 decadal survey missions, which will really be 4 missions, because aerosols and cloud convection precipitation have been combined into 1 mission, but that these missions are considered an Earth system observatory. And so that, the missions interact, that it's really a multidisciplinary, a multi-measurement, multi-sensor effort. And while this is all fine and makes sense, the actual implementation of the back end of those is still very much in flux. And what I mean with that is that it's not really clear how best to analyze, how to best generate products from those 4 missions, and then, you know, in the future from the Explorer missions, how to analyze them in a system way. How do the data need to look like? And that's something that is defined, developed right now, and that's something where you as a community probably can provide input, and which is a good thing. I think it's a good thing that it's not defined right now, because there is some time, but you know, my management need to get at it, and you know, there is some room and opportunity, hopefully, for defining what that actually means, how to best generate data sets that allow true Earth system science. If you go to the next slide, I'm probably talking too much. Open science, you know, this has become like a buzzword lately, open source science, etc. You know, NASA, NSF, we're all moving very fast towards open source science. And, you know, and I think it's a good thing. It is also a big paradigm shift. And I realized the apprehension for 2 reasons, really. A, we easily say, hey, we want open science, we want you to collaborate, we want you to share everything. And that sounds all great in an ideal world. But I also realized that, you know, every 3 years, your competitors, you know, you write proposals, and, you know, you need to get funded, and your ideas, your capabilities are your livelihood in some ways. And so, you know, so I get this sentiment, if you will. You know, I think science is moving, you know, forward to addressing those, though, so that, for example, when you share code, you're moving towards open source science, as I said. When you share code, you can get a DOI for the code, so that you get proper credit in publications, etc., for the code that you developed. And then with regard to code itself, you know, there is this apprehension that, you know, my code is not meant to be, you know, meant to be shared. This is my thinking, this is my chaos, the chaos in my head that, you know, eventually led to some, you know, discoveries, etc., or to some algorithm or whatever it is. And I think my feeling is, and what I hear is that fear is, you know, shouldn't be as much as it is, because nobody is judging people on the code that they developed. And, you know, but we also realize that, you know, it may be a little more costly, and if you write in a proposal some programming help to make your code shareable, help you with this, you know, that's, you know, as far as I'm concerned, certainly, you know, a well-justified expense on your budget, if that makes sense. Go to the next slide. I think that's my last slide. Yep. The bottom line here is we are serving you, you know, so please talk to us with any questions, concerns, issues, ideas. You know, we do nothing other than moving money, really, and, you know, yeah, we are serving you. That's how it is. And, you know, I was at the WAISH workshop the other day, West Antarctic Ice Sheet workshop, and it was the first in-person workshop. And it was really refreshing having lunch with, you know, with colleagues, with, you know, fellow scientists, with early scientists, with students, and having these small conversations which are very inspiring, very helpful for me as a program manager, and hopefully also for the students or scientists. And in this whole COVID-19 environment, you know, those small conversations fall through the cracks. If it's a big issue, I get an email, hey, can we talk about it? And, you know, but these small issues are not being addressed anymore. And that's not good. And, and I also realized that, early career scientists are less likely to reach out to me to talk or reach out to any program manager to talk. And so, which I completely get, I would have been the same, or I was the same when I was a young scientist. So I really want to encourage you to, to seriously reach out, ask any, bug us at any time. You never bug us and you never pester us. As I said, we're serving you. And I think that's all I had. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, thank you, Thorsten. That was great. So thank you, Thorsten. Thank you, Michael, for your presentations. We have between 10 and 15 minutes for Q&A. I've seen quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go through those in chronological order. But as a reminder, if you prefer to speak rather than type, or you have a question that is just easier to explain talking out loud, feel free to use the raise hand function. It's on under the reactions button on your toolbar. And if you're on the phone, it's *9. So we had a question that came directly to me from Pierre LeBlanc that is, do you use any of the Canadian RadarSat constellation?
So that's a good question. And I think there were some discussions with having those data available to US scientists. And I don't know where this stands, to tell you the truth, the RadarSat constellation. Very good question. I don't know the answer. I think you should get the data for free, but that was a tendency, and I think it will, but I don't know where that stands. That's an excellent question. I don't know.
And we got a question from Monica that Michael answered, but I'm going to just read it aloud in case folks aren't tracking the chat. Monica asked if the finest is the finest irrespective of is the finest irrespective of funded projects. In other words, is it meant to help institutions or groups with no other means to fund students? Michael, in the chat, you said finest is open to all irrespective of funded projects, but if there's anything you want to add.
No, yeah, Mike is absolutely right on. Yeah, this is open to anyone, any great idea, absolutely.
But they need to be citizens or permanent residents, correct?
I beg your pardon?
They need to be citizens or permanent residents, I assume.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
And I mean, it needs to be a US university.
Okay, yes, sure.
And
the citizenship doesn't matter.
No.
Okay.
If you see something, about it, let me know.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the PI on those proposals is like a academic, a professor at a university or something similar, and the student is what we call a future investigator on those proposals. So those proposals are not submitted by the students themselves. They're expected to write the proposal with some input from their academic advisor, but it's yeah, they're not the PIs.
Great. We've got a question in the chat from David Rounce asking for Thorsten, is there any thought given to raising the NIP program to be within 6 years of getting your PhD? The 3-year call is oriented such that some individuals will be able to submit twice, while others will be unlucky and only get one shot.
Maybe that's a good point. And the first person who's talking about it, and it's who's mentioning it, and it's something we should actually talk about at HQ. That's a very fair point. It's a very fair point.
Also, it might disadvantage women that have kids. I don't know, just putting it out there too. We usually take some time off, and yeah, because of this, for example, I wasn't able to apply.
I do believe there are mechanisms in place to account for that, and Allison Liedner is the program manager for that particular program, and so that would be the person to contact if you have circumstances like that to see if there's a waiver process. But I do believe there are mechanisms for that.
We've got a question from Carl Humrick asking, is there any interest in either the cryo or terrestrial ecology program in supporting work to prepare to use PACE data, even though it's primarily an ocean atmosphere mission? PACE will launch in a couple of years, well before SDG.
So if I can answer first. Absolutely. If you have a great idea how PACE would be useful for polar, for cryospheric sciences, most definitely. That's great. It's a data set that's right there. And I love it when with the general with the Decadal Survey missions in general, I love it if people use non-cryo missions for cryospheric sciences. It's it's very creative. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would say the same thing from the ecosystem's perspectives. If there's a way to integrate it into a proposal that is responsive to one of the calls, then certainly we would welcome consideration of that.
Great. We've got a question in the chat from Lawrence Willis that it looks like Caitlin has responded to, but I'll read that for folks who aren't tracking the chat. And then Michael and Thorsten, if you have anything to add. So Lawrence asks, for the DAPR system, does this mean one shouldn't explicitly or even implicitly refer to their own group's research when writing a proposal? And Caitlin says that the proposal and solicitation support teams do not sanitize proposals that are submitted. So following the DAPR guidelines are critical for proposers. So yes, explicitly referring to your own group's research, i.e. in the first person, it would be considered a violation. And there were a couple of community town halls prior to the proposals being due this year to get the community familiar with the process. So other NASA programs will likely do the same.
That's a good answer. But Caitlin is right on there.
Which was different than my answer, so I'm glad I learned something today. I haven't been through the dual anonymous peer review yet.
Yeah, we learned a lot in this process as well. So so we'll be more prepared in the future to help other programs that want to adopt the DAPR process for their solicitations in the future.
I think the guidelines are pretty good. Once you have our pre-proposal slides for DAPR are available on our website, ice.nasa.gov. And I think they have some helpful hints. In case you're interested, this is probably not relevant right now because the cryo call closed, but the slides are on our webpage. As I said, ice.nasa.gov.
I just dropped the link in the chat. So, Sinead, I'm not sure I totally understand your question. For the DAPR process for science teams, it would probably not be possible to implement DAPR in those cases.
I don't see why not, because it's about science, and so yeah, I don't see why not, but we can talk about it offline. It's because now the science team is about science investigations. So yeah.
A question from David Rounce from Michael: is any consideration to glaciers given in the terrestrial ecology program, or is the preference for glacial-oriented proposals to go to the cryosphere program? I note that snow and permafrost are shown in the word diagram, but glaciers are not.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that primarily glacial-oriented research would go to the Cryospheric Sciences program. However, if you can draw a link between glacial processes and terrestrial land ecosystem processes like vegetation dynamics, for example, glacial retreat, something like that, then it would be something that we would be interested in funding, and we have funded some projects on that in the past, although not many, just because not a lot of people have proposed to do that sort of thing in the past.
Yeah, quick addition maybe, and you know that probably, David.
You're muted, Thorsten.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. And the glaciers is an interesting one. It depends on the scientific objective. If many glacier projects are funded under the terrestrial hydrology program, because glaciers serve as you know, David, as a water supply, and so depending on the scientific objectives, glacial studies are funded under cryo, are funded under Mike's program, or funded under terrestrial hydrology. So they fall in between these different categories, if you will, which may be a good or a bad thing. I don't know, depends on how you see it.
Those are all the questions I see in the chat. We do have time for probably one more if anyone wants to quickly type it up in the chat or raise your hand. Or Michael, Thorsten, Caitlin, if any of you have some closing thoughts you'd like to share. Not to put you on the spot.
Hey, Liz, this is Caitlin Florentine. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Awesome. Well, thanks all for the great webinar and lots of really useful information and insight. I think these program manager chats are really helpful. So thanks for that. My question has to do with sort of really high level funding provisions for cryospheric science and earth science in general. I get the sense that our field faces issues of scarcity where a lot of science that has really valuable merit ends up on the cutting room floor. And I'm interested throughout the halls of NASA and at HQ, if there are conversations, just sort of what the mechanism looks like to champion the merit of earth science and sort of rectify this discrepancy between the societally pertinent work that we're all doing and sort of the lack of funding, basically, in general. So big question here for the end, but if you have just a couple of immediate reflections, I'd be really interested to hear your perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? And we're all fighting for, you know, our own disciplines, obviously. And, you know, so if my bosses ask, you know, for some cryo slides, you know, I drop everything and provide some cryo slides to help my bosses make the case to Congress to put more money into cryospheric sciences and make it clear how important cryospheric sciences is. You know, and also, and I would say this every time, you know, if you have some important results, you know, please send me a one-slider because of that result in a very easy, you know, 8th grade, you know, level, because so that I can forward this to my management, that they can forward or they can use to make the case how important, in my case, cryospheric sciences is. You know, competition is tough, and you know, it's becoming tougher. And you know, we realize that success rate of proposals are, you know, maybe 20% at best on average. And that means you have to write 5 proposals to get 1 proposal funded. And if you know, all scientists are equal. And so it's a difficult situation. It's very important, you know, climate change, you know, earth science is super, super important. I'm hoping, as I said in my opening remarks, that our budget will, you know, hopefully significantly increase. But, you know, there's only so much we can do. It's, you know, in the end of the day, you know, it's in the hands of Congress and the Senate and the President how much they put in for, you know, earth sciences. But, you know, we try as hard as we can, and you can help advocating and making it clear how important earth sciences or how important, you know, the cryosphere is for not only for scientific research, it's not academic, but also, you know, for the benefit of, you know, mankind, if you will, and for tackling like issues like sea level rise, etc.
Yeah,
I don't know if this is helpful.
I'll only add on to the end of your comments there about Congress. And, you know, this administration is very interested in earth science, and we're starting to, as Thorsten said, you know, we're hoping for decent increases, but you know, they're doing budget bills and budget reconciliation right now. And so you don't really know how that's going to shake out until it actually does. So fingers crossed. But the other thing is that, you know, we're on a 4-year cycle with administration, so a lot can change between administrations. And so, yeah, we're at the whim of the executive and the congressional branches. So to some extent, I mean, we do try to manage up, like Thorsten said, by showing awesome results and applications and that sort of thing. So yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a great place to end. And I know we're at the top of the hour. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope to see you at an upcoming event. I'm just dropping the link to our calendar in the chat. We have a couple of upcoming program manager chats with NSF on the 15th. No, I'm sorry. On the 21st, October 21st, we'll have one with the NSF Polar Cyber Infrastructure group. And then later on October 25th, the Office of Polar Programs Arctic Sciences section will be holding a office hours. So hope to see you there. And this will be recorded and posted to the ARPIC Collaborations website by the end of the week. So thanks everyone, have a great day.
All right, thank you.